So just to clarify, even veterans who were turned down before have the opportunity to go back and reapply.
Especially veterans who were turned down before. That is probably the group that most benefits from the PACT Act. But, with regard to Agent Orange, for example, many veterans applied for benefits based on exposure to Agent Orange and resulting diseases like diabetes or lung cancer or whatever it is, and were turned down because they were stationed in Thailand, not in Vietnam. And the PACT Act eliminates that dichotomy and says everybody who served in the Southeast Asia theater is now entitled to these presumptions. And so if someone was turned down, or worse yet, someone had cancer and died, their widow or other eligible substitute can now bring that claim forward. So, the widows in particular are entitled to what are called DIC benefits based on what would now be a service-connected death, which was not service-connected prior to the PACT Act.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Tony Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA, your guide to unlocking veterans' disability benefits. If you're a veteran applying for benefits, be sure to subscribe for the latest developments of VA disability. So welcome to our podcast. So who's this podcast for? Well, this podcast is for veterans, but it's broader than that. It's for relatives of veterans, friends of veterans, really for anyone who wants to see that veterans get a fair shake in their claims for veterans' disability benefits. So who are we? Well, I'm Francis Jackson, this is Christian Terrison, and we're here from Jackson & MacNichol, a law firm that specializes in helping veterans to get justice on their claims for veterans' disability benefits. What's this about? Well, today we're going to talk about the biggest change in VA benefits in the last 40 years, the PACT Act. So with that, let's go.
All right. Now, we've addressed some parts of the PACT Act in other episodes, but we didn't have sort of a comprehensive overview. So that's sort of the goal today.
Okay.
So to start at the beginning, what is the PACT Act and what prompted its creation?
Okay. The PACT Act is really a combination of a number of different legislative proposals to improve veterans' benefits that were made over the last 10 years or so. And finally, President Biden pushed this combined act, kind of aggregating all of these different issues, through the House and Senate in the last few years, making it effective in August of 2022. And what the PACT Act does is primarily to expand healthcare and veterans' disability benefits for people exposed to the burn pits in primarily Afghanistan and Iraq, Kuwait. But it also kind of picks up a bunch of other sets of folks who had exposure-related illnesses or disabilities from their service. So it kind of picked up folks who've been exposed to the contaminated drinking water at the big Marine base at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. It picked up some folks who had served in Southeast Asia in the Vietnam conflict, And it's kind of an umbrella for all of those different sets of issues.
All right. So what, I guess, problem is it solving for veterans?
Well, it primarily solves the problem of helping veterans to get both health care and disability benefits for toxic exposures. That's really its big kind of unifying central point. So, for example, if you are a veteran who served during the Vietnam War, but did not serve directly in Vietnam. So particularly the folks who were stationed at the Thai air bases in Thailand, the Royal Air Bases there, or were among the special forces that went into Laos and Cambodia, which of course everybody denied at the time. But if you were in one of those groups and necessarily exposed to Agent Orange, this added some presumptive conditions and made you eligible for the general presumptions in regard to Agent Orange. So for folks who served in Vietnam or Thailand or went into Cambodia or Laos, they added two new presumptive conditions. One is hypertension, and the other is something called monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significance. If that's not a mouthful, I don't know what is. But both of those conditions have now been shown medically to be much more common in people exposed to Agent Orange than in the general population. And as a result, they've made it presumptively service connected for folks who served in those areas. And as I mentioned, they also extended the general Agent Orange presumptions that have been available for years for people who served in Vietnam to those who served primarily in Thailand. That's the biggest group of folks who kind of got the short end there.
Okay. So what should veterans know about their eligibility for disability benefits under the PACT Act?
Well, there are really two big groups of folks who should be paying attention to the PACT Act. Folks who served in the Middle East, in Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, and were exposed to the burn pits. What they did in the PACT Act was to make most of the respiratory problems that folks have developed in response to exposure to the burn pits presumptive conditions. So, for example, if you had chronic bronchitis, COPD, chronic sinusitis, emphysema, there's a whole laundry list of kind of respiratory related problems that the PACT Act makes presumptive. And that's a big deal because when they make a condition presumptive, what it means is all you have to show is that you have the condition and you were in the area that is designated as having been exposed. You no longer have to make the medical connection yourself. The VA makes that medical connection automatically for you. And that's huge because many, many people got denied benefits because they couldn't prove that medical connection. And now they can go back to the VA and say, excuse me, but the PACT Act changes things and makes it presumptive that I'm entitled to service-connected benefits for my COPD or lung cancer or kidney cancer or whatever the condition was.
So just to clarify, even veterans who were turned down before have the opportunity to go back and reapply.
Especially veterans who were turned down before. That is probably the group that most benefits from the PACT Act. But, with regard to Agent Orange, for example, many, many veterans applied for benefits based on exposure to Agent Orange and resulting diseases like diabetes or lung cancer or whatever it is, and were turned down because they were stationed in Thailand, not in Vietnam. And the PACT Act eliminates that dichotomy and says everybody who served in the Southeast Asia theater is now entitled to these presumptions. And so if someone was turned down, or worse yet, someone had cancer and died, their widow or, other eligible substitute can now bring that claim forward. So, the widows in particular are entitled to what are called DIC benefits based on what would now be a service-connected death, which was not service-connected prior to the PACT Act.
Okay. And so how has the PACT Act changed the legal landscape for appealing VA disability decisions related to toxic exposure? Because I know you've
Well, what it's done, for example, we had a number of clients who had claims pending based on exposure to Agent Orange, but when they were stationed in Thailand. There are half a dozen Air Force bases that Agent Orange was used at. And most of those folks have been denied benefits. We were able to prove what's called direct service connection for some of them, and had a lot more that we're working on. What the PACT Act did was, as of its effective date in August of 2022, it got all those folks health care and ongoing benefits. The piece that it didn't clean up, if you will, is, say, for example, you applied 10 years ago or 12 years ago, and your claim had been going on for 10 years as of August of 2022. The VA now comes along and says, oh, okay, PACT Act, you're presumptive from August of 2022, granted, but the veteran says, excuse me, but I've had this claim pending for 10 years before the PACT Act came along. What are you doing about that? And they say, well, the PACT Act doesn't cover that. So we're continuing to pursue those claims for people, and we're winning them. But, what the PACT Act does, as of its effective date in August of 2022, is to step in and say, okay, from this point on, you get benefits, you get health care.
Gotcha. And then what should veterans know about deadlines for filing claims under the PACT Act?
Well, the only real deadlines in the Act have passed. There was a special provision in the Act that allowed a 2-year window from August of 2022 to August of 2024 for people who were exposed to the contaminated water at Camp Lejeune at the big base in North Carolina to step in and make a claim. It wasn't a veterans benefits claim. It was actually what was essentially a Federal Tort Claims Act claim. It was dressed up a little bit. The essence of it was the Federal Tort Claims Act. And those folks had a 2-year window to file their claims. Many did, and a large number of those are still pending in the Eastern District of North Carolina and waiting to be resolved. And there was also a special earlier benefits kind of thing if you applied within the time for some of these other conditions. But the timelines are gone. Any of the special timing things have passed. So right now it's just a question of you make a claim and submit it, and if your claim is presumptive, it'll get granted fairly quickly. If it's not one of the presumptives, the various pieces of the Act may still help. It's pretty hard, for example, for the VA to say, well, okay, you were at the Royal Thai Air Base at whichever, Udon, whatever, and so your claim is presumptive under the PACT Act as of August of 2022, but we don't think you were exposed to Agent Orange in the preceding 10 years. Not that they don't ever say that, but it doesn't have the strength it used to have.
Sure.
So, sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but what I want to focus on is right now, these are straightforward VA benefits claims. There aren't any special provisions that apply at this point in time. Okay. So you just make your application, and if it's presumptive, it'll probably be granted fairly quickly. If it's direct service, then, well, you've got to kind of slog through the claim like everybody else. But it will be a little easier with everything that's happened.
Yeah, so just to underscore, that's, any veteran who, whether they were turned down before in the past, whether they've never filed a claim for it before, any veteran who has a medical condition that, is related to toxic exposure, now is the time they can go in, they can file. It doesn't matter if it was,
Previously
10 years
denied,
ago,
yep.
20 years ago,
Yep.
50 years ago, get those claims in.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough, the people who really will benefit the most are folks who previously applied and were denied, or worse yet, people who who died from these conditions and had been denied, and their spouse needs these DIC benefits. Those two groups are really the people who ought to be right at the top of the list for applying.
And so for the DIC benefits, are there time restrictions or constraints there? Or
No, you can file for DIC anytime. Unfortunately, the time for accrued benefits for most of those folks has passed, but DIC has no time limit for filing.
okay. And can you talk a little bit about what relatives would qualify in that situation? Spouse is an obvious
Well,
one.
primarily we're talking spouse because most of these cases that were turned down were turned down far enough back that there are no surviving children under 18. There are a few cases out there, I'm sure, where there is a child who became permanently disabled before the age of 18. The VA calls that a helpless child claim, and those folks would still be eligible to go back and make the claim. But, that's a very small group.
Sure.
Beyond that, there aren't really any good alternatives for most folks.
Gotcha. And as always, we want to emphasize if you suspect that you could qualify, talk to a lawyer because they can sort out your specific case. There are so many moving parts to who's eligible and when that, a podcast on the internet is not the resource to help you there.
It's, we do our best, but a definitive statement about your eligibility is beyond what we can do in the context of a podcast.
Yeah. So are there any challenges or pitfalls veterans should be aware of when filing PACT Act claims?
Well, the biggest thing is just showing that you were in one of the areas designated as exposed. For whatever reasons, lots of folks who are assigned on a temporary basis, TDY they call it in the military, those orders often don't show up in the permanent file. And so there is a real challenge in some cases proving that you were actually in the area where the exposure occurred at the relevant time. So one of the things that you want to be careful of if you're a veteran and you're applying is to make sure that you have obtained any documentation that's available showing where you were during the relevant period. That's kind of the biggest challenge because the existence of the condition and the existence of the condition will be shown by the current medical evidence, and the relationship to service will be shown by the presumption. So all you have to show is that you were at the right place, or the wrong place actually, at the time, and got the exposure that caused your problem.
Gotcha. So we're nearly out of time for today, but what would your, parting advice be to veterans about taking advantage of the expanded benefits under the PACT Act?
Well, I think the most important thing is what you hit on before. If you had a claim and it was denied, refile. Refile right now, not tomorrow, not next week. Do it now, because the sooner you refile, the sooner you will get eligibility to health care and to disability benefits. And if sadly you are the surviving spouse of a service person who died from one of these conditions, particularly the cancers, brain cancer, gastrointestinal cancer, glioblastoma, kidney cancer, there are a whole list of them. If you're someone who lost a military spouse who was exposed and from one of these conditions and you don't have DIC benefits, rush right out to file. Don't wait. Get the claim filed, get it started. You can develop the claim as you go along, but get it filed.
All right. And this has been another episode of Victory Over the VA. Thank you for tuning in. Please be sure to like and subscribe and join us again next week.
We'll hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, If you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.